Turnover to go, flipping, not flopping, and Hollywood versus Broadway. All coming up straight ahead on this edition of the Use Your Head podcast. Warm early autumn greetings to you from the Use Your Head podcast. This is John McLean. Thanks for joining us for this half-hour foray into the issues of the day. From a Use Your Head perspective, I say warm. It is unseasonably warm here in North Texas for this time of year. You know, this is a bizarre time here in Texas, in a lot of places. We're not unique in this, in that, you know, Halloween every year, you never know if you need a warm costume or if you need a very cold weather costume. I've seen kids bundled up, you know, they'll go to all this trouble to make a really cool costume, and then a cold front comes, and then they've got this giant parka that just totally blows the image of the costume, and they're upset about it. I've also seen, these kids that get these big inflatable dinosaur things that, they're hot because they're made of, plastic or nylon or whatever. They don't breathe because they have to hold in the air. They're inflated. I've seen kids walk. It's been so hot on Halloween night. I've seen kids walking down the sidewalk, the thing's just dragging behind them. And they're there in like a tank top, it's all sweaty. Whatever it takes to get that melty chocolate candy, or those awful candy corns. Anyway, all that to say, I don't know why I went there. Wish it would cool off a little bit. Hope it's nice where you are. Welcome. This is the podcast where we take the issues of the day and we reject the idea that we are urged to let other people tell us what to think. Here's what the experts say. Experts. What degree do you have to get to say you're an expert? None. You just have to get somebody to put you on TV or on the radio and say you're an expert. Give me a break. Look, we have a brain. We can think for ourselves, and that's what the Use Your Head podcast is all about, heard around the world on your favorite content platform. And with that, our first exciting topic of the day. I'll take a turnover to go. I'm not talking about food, as you probably guessed. No. An article, we're going to dive into kind of a different perspective today. A lot of times we get our topics on the show from kind of the general media. This is kind of a unique deal. This is a focused type of journal. This is from HR Morning, Human Resources. So this is from a digest written by and for HR pros. People that work in human resources, that department that you have to be very careful not to upset, because they wield a significant influence in corporate America today. This article is by Michelle McGovern, and it says, bad managers cause turnover. 5 tips to prevent it. Before we dive into the article, let's acknowledge the fact that turnover is a huge problem in corporate America today. The old days of someone, signing up for a company, we're going to give you a job, and you work hard and you try to stay as long as you can and build up a reputation, build up seniority, build up retirement, and climb the ladder within a company. You start out in the mailroom and now you're in the C-suite. That idea is kind of gone now. And we have a very migratory corporate culture, at least in America. I don't know about around the world, but here that's definitely true. And so it's just kind of a different, there are many reasons for that. We're going to dive into a couple of those today. But the one thing that's true is turnover is expensive. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Let's jump to the article by Michelle McGovern. Again, her title, Bad Managers Cause Turnover, 5 Tips to Prevent It. Here's what McGovern says. If you have turnover, you have bad managers. Unfortunately, you likely have some bad managers. Almost 75% of employees have either left a job or considered leaving because of a bad boss, according to research from Unmind. Of course, most companies aren't busting at the seams with bad managers. In fact, most managers are good, if not great. But one bad manager can spoil an entire team. Bad managers lack the skills necessary to lead and inspire employee well-being and productivity, says Dr. Nick Taylor. He's the co-founder and CEO of Unmind. And working under a bad manager can significantly impact employee stress levels and mental health. The article goes on, naturally, HR pros want to avoid promoting bad bosses, but if they make it into leadership positions, you want to either help them become better leaders or weed them out. Put a star by that. The ideal situation is to help them become the kind of manager employees want to follow, but first, HR needs to identify bad managers in their midst. But this isn't a witch hunt. HR doesn't want to purposefully pursue bad bosses. You want to keep an eye out for anyone who might be failing their teams. All right, time out right here. Why don't we want to pursue bad bosses? I mean, if bad bosses are causing turnover, which costs money, which increases costs, and as we know in corporate America, a corporation is owned by stockholders, and the number one job of a CEO and the board and everyone in management is what? To increase shareholder value. If you're not doing that, you're not doing your job. Okay, if we have bad managers that are reducing shareholder value by driving talent away, we should weed them out. Anything that increases your costs, you should seek to weed it out. So I don't like this idea of this is not, and in the article, she italicizes and bolds. So she hits the bold and the italics button to say, but this isn't a witch hunt. As if to say, don't worry, we're not coming after people. And this is where I begin to use my head, as you may have detected. No doubt, all right, no doubt, there are some plain old bad managers out there. You've worked for them. I've worked for them. They're out there, all right? And in some cases, training may help them get better. There can be training issues. But I have found, as I use my head, that most of the time, it's just a personality. Some people have a personality for leadership, and some people have a personality for followship. I'll be totally frank with you. I tend to lean toward the followship. I like to follow a good leader. I love a leader to give me a locker room speech and even dress me down at times when I need it and send me out there confident knowing that the leader's got my back and I'm charging forward for the mission. That's kind of what inspires me. And that inspired me in the radio business. I loved a program director that would challenge me and would say, you know what, you're doing okay, but you can be better and you must be better. And, and then together we're going to make it and the charge forward. Some people are wired that way. Others are wired for leadership. And, if you've ever worked for a boss that you would walk through fire for, that's a good leader. And there's a number of, we learn all about what makes a good leader. Those things are largely true. But here's the other thing. All right. And I think that this is fair to say, because this story is, after all, from a HR digest, from a human resources perspective. The HR universe, okay, and I've kind of made up that term to describe, because it really is. If you've worked for a big company especially, the HR department is its own universe. It's kind of like internal affairs, from the old cop shows, and the internal affairs people come around. You remember Mel Gibson and Danny Glover in the Lethal Weapon movies? When the internal affairs people came around, it was like the enemy coming into your territory, right? Which is, maybe there's a little truth to that. It's only funny because it's true. Anyway, the HR universe has made it nearly impossible to fire people. This is where I'm going here. All right. If you've got a manager that just stinks, all right, and everybody says this person's terrible, they're either abusive or they're incompetent or they are inappropriate or they don't understand the mission or they're just plain not wired to be a leader. All right. Maybe they're weak. Maybe they throw their employees under the bus when things go wrong. Nothing will chase somebody worse when you lose confidence in your boss that they don't have your back. All of these things. And look, it's fine. People are people. But when HR makes it impossible to fire people or very difficult to fire people, it just exacerbates the problem. All right. The process, let's say you have a bad boss, and it can be, and the reasons don't matter. They're just a bad boss. They're ineffective. They're not making their goals, and they can't keep a team. Their people keep leaving, requesting transfer, just a bad boss. Yeah, you can seek out training opportunities, but if they're not wired to be good, or if they don't want to be good, if they're just mailing it in, then the training's not going to help, and it's just going to cost more money. The process to move on from an employee that's not performing, a boss that's not performing in a company is so long that by the time that the needed change is made, and that's a big if, it may never happen, the damage is done. How many employees have run off to the competition in some cases, which is kind of a double whammy, by the time that the change is made? The damage is done. All right. Human resources. And I'm talking about I'm not talking about small business, although, small to medium business, this still applies. When you get big enough to have an HR department where you start referring to human beings as resources, which I don't like that language anyway. I would much prefer talent or, even the word employee is better than human resource. Makes you sound like a car part. I've never liked that. You're a human resource. No, I'm not. I'm a person. Anyway, don't want to veer too far off the topic here. HR seems a lot like a bureaucracy, and it is. You've got the chief of HR, and then you've got the HR people under them, and then the HR people under them. And yes, they have I'm not belittling human resources, although I hate the name. They have a job to do, all right, because employees are what make the company go round, and you've got to take care of them, and you've got to govern them, and you've got to make sure they're following the manual, and you've got to make sure all this. But when you get a bad apple that's spoiling the bunch, and it takes years usually before you can actually finally take their badge and say, we're walking you out, we're done with you. You got to put them on a plan, and you've got to have piles of evidence, and you've got to have this. And if anything gets missing, nope, we can't do that. Thank you again, trial lawyers. All right. Because this is why all this happens. These HR things are in place to make sure that the company doesn't get sued. That's where all of this comes from. You can't fire me, and I'm going to prove that it was really because of this. Never mind the fact that my performance is terrible. Very often, what I'll call a poison pill employee who's out there to bilk all they can steal and really doesn't want to work. I used to work with a supervisor in kind of a blue collar warehouse kind of situation that would see these people and he'd say, he don't want no job. And I used to because I knew what he meant. He doesn't want a job. He wants a paycheck. He doesn't want a job. There are people like that out there. And a lot of them have educations and they're out there trying to climb the ladder and don't want to work. And they walk all over people. These are poison pills, but it's very, 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 very hard to get rid of them. I mean, unless they run naked down the hall at the office, and sometimes even that's not going to be enough, or they commit some sort of corporate espionage and get something egregious that would land them in jail maybe, you can't fire them. It's virtually impossible. You just have to sit there and work the process while the poison continues to spread. This, I think, is a huge, huge problem. I admire the fact that you want to train them up and try to make them better. And yes, hiring people is expensive, but running off talent one after the other because of one bad apple spoiling the bunch, that is even more expensive. We need some sort of HR reform. Don't have the answer, but that's what I come up with when I use my head. Topic number 2 on the Use Your Head podcast for this week, which is heard all around the world. And you can contact us anytime at john@useyourheadpodcast.com. Give me a topic suggestion. Tell me I'm wrong. Debate, argue. That's how we learn, is by wrestling with the issues. I'd love to hear what you come up with when you use your head. Again, the email address is john@useyourheadpodcast.com. Topic 2, flipping, not flopping. This one is about real estate. It's from realtor.com. They have a little blog section. It's a wild website. It had lots of stuff there. They have a blog section. This one is written by Julie Gerstein. And she says this: America's renovation boom is leveling off, but still going strong. Americans are still renovating up a storm, although not as much as they did during the COVID-19 pandemic. Spending on home improvements and maintenance is expected to grow from its current $472 billion to $477 billion by the third quarter, a modest increase of 1.2%, according to the latest leading indicator of remodeling activity report released by the Remodeling Futures Program at the Joint Center for Housing Studies of Harvard University. That's a mouthful. All right, let's stop right there and talk numbers. That's almost $500 billion. So a modest 1.2% increase is a lot of money. But again, there are a lot of houses here and things are expensive. Back to the article. To develop its projections, the LIRA team examines various indicators, including building material sales and the number of remodeling permits issued. So that's how they come up with their trends. The 1.2% increase is a sign that the market might be leveling off and correcting from the pandemic when homeowners were spending more time and money on home projects. Plus, low interest rates at the time motivated sellers to make their homes as up-to-date as possible for the market. All right, that makes sense, right? So when we were locked down, you're at home anyway, you start looking around and going, boy, my bathroom's really ugly. Or, man, that sink is so, and so you start, because there's nothing else to do. And yes, interest rates were low, and as people were looking to sell, the market was very competitive. They're like, hey, yeah, let's fix up the house. So this all makes sense to me. Back to the article. That led to what Abby Will, associate director of the Remodeling Futures program, called the Big Boom, where the renovation market increased by 10 to 15%. The boom suggested that it was people catching up on work that they already wanted to do, she explains. It was also probably people doing work that they hadn't quite planned to do, but it was just a convenient time, a better time. I think this is a little bit of resettling to more normal rates, although we're not there yet, she says. Even though growth in the market hasn't been the raging 10% year over year or 15% year over year growth that we saw during the first couple of years of the pandemic, we're still expecting a lot of spending. Despite the market's slowdown over the past couple of years, Will says there's still a phenomenal amount of spending, way more spending than what we saw in 2019 before the pandemic. All right, we'll stop there. So this all makes sense, right? I mean, this so far, I'm like, okay, this tracks, makes sense, all right? But when I use my head, I start thinking about the idea, these DIY shows were and are madly popular. And there's a lot of people that literally sit around all weekend and watch this stuff. They watch these DIYers of various skill levels. You've got on the one end, you've got the disaster shows where people, laugh and chuckle when walls collapse and things go terribly wrong. And then there's the other ones where you have legitimate pros who are professional designers or builders or like this guy up in Canada, Holmes, doing it right. Those types of people, true experts who are doing things and showing, and people learn from these shows. Whatever the case, it's popular. And it's popular because people are into this stuff. But not everyone. And I've been a homeowner for many, many years. I've owned brand new houses. I've had homes built. And I've bought, not fixer-uppers, but homes that were rough around the edges. The one I live in now was kind of like that. I was like, you know what? It's got good bones. And we can live here and then fix these things that we don't like so much as we go. And so it's a process. But when you read articles like this, it kind of lumps everyone into one group. And I get it. That's not really what the article's about. It's more of an economic trend type analysis. But I always think about these projects and how bad it hurts when I smack my thumb with a hammer and how expensive it is when I drop that piece of drywall and it breaks in 4 pieces and I got to go buy some more. Or how much it costs for a piece of lousy utility-grade plywood to deck an attic. All these things make me think and put myself in the DIYer's shoes. And it occurs to me that in our culture, there are DIYers and there are non-DIYers. So let's focus on the latter group here. All right, because that's the group I'm in, really. I have a few skills, but I'm not the person that's going to go, yeah, you know what, honey, let's tackle this kitchen. We can do it. We can do it. Never going to say that to my wife. And she knows better. I promised to never lie to her, so I can't say that to my wife. It's important to note that most of these projects are way out of reach for many folks. We're talking about $500 billion industry in renovation. Or we're not talking about new construction. We're talking about people either doing it themselves or hiring it out. Renovation. The people that say on TV, and there are people out there that say this, I hear it a lot. Here's a project anyone can do. They're fools. That's not true. It's just not true. And it made me think of the car market. And I promise I'm driving to a point here. When I used my head about this, I thought about, using my training in economics and real world experience. It's just like the car market. Prices for new cars go up. People are more inclined to just fix the old one. And here's the thing. I like that. I think, I can't, this house, the kitchen is dated. That word dated, like it's a bad thing. My kitchen is dated. Well, couldn't you say vintage or classic? In other words, if something's dated, we just want to throw it away. We want to junk it. Well, my car doesn't have the latest tech. I can't tolerate driving this car. We throw way too many things away just because they're not the latest, greatest. How many thousands of dollars do we spend on the latest, greatest cell phone? Ooh, there's a new functionality, or this cell phone is slightly faster. And what it really is when I'm talking on the phone at lunch and want everybody to see, ooh, what phone is that? Oh, you got the new phone. Come on. What is it that Solomon said? It is vanity. I like the idea that we're renovating. Now, listen, it's not cheap. All right. Everything's expensive right now. Building materials, certainly no exception. But I like the idea that people are either doing it themselves, or if they're like me, are more inclined to hire a pro to fix it up. We need to stop throwing, and this, I've kind of veered off the kind of the point here, but this is what I came up with. I follow the bunny trails of my head, and I share those ideas. I think we need to be fixing more cars, and we need to be updating more homes instead of just throwing them out and getting new all the time. I like this trend, and I think that it's often looked at as like, oh, well, it's going to cost $1,500 to fix the car, which is paid for and still runs fine. I just think that we need to throw away less and kind of be, I guess, happier with repairing and keeping what we have, including our homes. So fix it up. Or better yet, hire a pro to do it. Topic number 3, we head to the Diamond. Hollywood versus Broadway. That's how it's being billed. The World Series begins in just a few days as I record this. The Yankees and the Dodgers. Found an article at The Independent from our friends in the UK. Across the pond, Dodgers versus Yankees isn't romantic, but it's the World Series baseball desperately needs. Article written by Luke Baker. Here's what Luke says. If you're looking for a romantic sporting story, then this World Series isn't for you. There will be no plucky underdog when the LA Dodgers and the New York Yankees begin their seven-game series to decide the winner of baseball's biggest prize this coming Friday evening. The mythology of baseball as America's pastime is rooted in feel-good stories played out amid hazy summer days, culminating in a shot at sporting immortality just as the air begins to take on an autumnal crispness. I like this writing. This is good. And the World Series has provided plenty of that romanticism over the past decade. The Kansas City Royals, comeback kids, claimed the crown in 2015. Sports' most cursed team, the Chicago Cubs, ended their 108-year title drought a year later. The 2019 Washington Nationals delivered a first World Series to our nation's capital 14 years after baseball returned to the city following 41 years away. And 2023 saw the Texas Rangers triumph for the very first time. But 2024 will be different. Dodgers versus Yankees is juggernaut versus juggernaut, Hollywood versus Broadway. And no matter who wins, it will be an unromantic victory for a financial and sporting behemoth. As a neutral, there is no little guy to root for this time around. And it is exactly the World Series that baseball needs right now. All right, time out there. First of all, could not agree more. Look, there's a lot of Yankee fans. New York, big city, one of the biggest. Ditto for LA, a lot of Dodger fans. For the rest of us, it's just there's that I think he's exactly right here. It takes away, there's no plucky underdog, there's no romantic story. It's two gigantic behemoths trading punches. And not to say that there's no excitement and certainly no significance to that. And yes, it has been 4 decades since these two teams have met. So look, and there's people out there saying, oh, it was rigged, baseball needs it. That's nonsense. All right, if they were going to rig this, they would have done it years ago. All right, so this is it's Dodgers versus Yankees. All right, let's go on with the article. A couple more interesting things here to dig up. However you dress it up, the Dodgers and the Yankees are Major League Baseball's two biggest teams. This year will be the 120th World Series, and the two franchises now have an incredible 65 appearances between them. They are consistently the sport's biggest spenders when it comes to players' salaries. They have rosters full of superstars, and as brands, they have genuine cultural cut-through that extends well beyond baseball. Throw in the fact that LA and New York are North America's two biggest media markets, and we're talking about a pair of sporting powerhouses. All right, we're going to stop there and use our heads here. I think, you know what, he's exactly right. Baker is right on the money here. Look, Yankee fans, Dodger fans will be offended. What are you talking about? Look, I'm not denigrating. You won. All right. You played some decent teams and you beat them. You won. All right. That's fine. Despite all the bigness, though, I'm just not all that excited about this matchup. And I'm a huge baseball fan. Most years, I will rearrange my schedule for the Fall Classic to make sure that I am there to see at least most of every game, if possible. You know, I do have priorities and I do have boundaries, but the World Series usually is something I look forward to. It's like a holiday. I look forward to it every year. I'm a fan. I love the crack of the bat. I love the excitement. I love, the moments. But for some reason, Hollywood versus Broadway, not a fan of either team for one thing, but that's beside the point. And if you are, then great. Enjoy. It makes me think of the film Moneyball. Great movie, by the way. A few years back, Brad Pitt plays the A's longtime general manager, Billy Beane, a guy who was a very highly sought after five-tool recruit that went to the big leagues and stunk it up. Didn't work out and became a general manager. At one point, a very poignant moment, by the way, in the film. Near the end, Pitt, playing Billy Beane, is watching film of a minor league, quote, miracle play. And as he's sitting there staring at the screen, he muses, how can you not be romantic about baseball? It's a great moment. Well, I think this year I can answer Beane's question. This World Series is how you cannot be romantic about baseball. Dodgers, Yankees. Biggest on the East versus biggest on the West. Meh. It didn't help either that Fox did their level best to burn us completely out on Ohtani with their silly 4 bats away graphic, which was appropriately mocked all over social media. Ohtani just 4 bats away. Silly. All they did was blow up the fact that these two teams are the biggest and everyone else isn't. And I understand that having an underdog is a great thing. Having an underdog makes it exciting for the sports media because everybody loves the Cinderella story, right? How many movies have been made? Do you believe in miracles? Yes. 1980 hockey team. Everybody loves that kind of thing. It's not here this year. And I'm not saying it's not going to be a good series, and I'm not saying we're going to have fantastic moments. I mean, there are some of the game's very best players squaring off, and there's going to be great matchups and all that, but the romanticism is missing. It's all about flash and big salaries. And I just, as a fan, that's not what I watch sports for. I guess I'm a sports romantic. Maybe that's what I am. Maybe that's why. Anyway, it starts Friday. If you're a fan of the Dodgers or a fan of the Yankees, congratulations on your pennant win. I know it's very exciting. Have a great time. And yeah, I'll probably tune into the series, but I don't see myself changing up my schedule for it. Because again, I'm just not kind of got enough of the big boys. Anyway, starts on Friday. That's it for this edition of the Use Your Head podcast, except to say one word: vote. If you don't, you can't whine. Early voting has started in many places across the country, including here in the Lone Star State. Make your voice heard, then you can whine all you want. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.